Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Paper Wishes Weekly Webisodes. I'm Sarah Newman, and I'm excited to show you 4 beautiful stamp collections from our friends at Creative Expressions. Today, we're going to play with autumn flowers, textured bubbles, toadstools, and finally, hair in the brambles. Now, these stamps all measure 4 inches by 6 inches, which make them perfect as the focal of your card. And today I'll show you a couple of my favorite stamping techniques using dye ink and a little bit of water. So I'm going to be using the Prism dye ink pads from our friends at Hunky Dory. Now, I'm also using the Dotted Duos number 3 paper pack, which has 12 double-sided papers patterned with large and small dots. Now, the color palette in here features some really pretty autumn tones with deep red, yellow, green, black and white, and more. Okay, I have 4 cards to share with you today featuring these really versatile stamps and a couple of my favorite techniques. So we'll work in a few demonstrations and explore how we can use these stamps on our cards. I'm really glad you're joining us today, so come play with us. Let's start off with one of the most versatile stamp designs that I have in my stash, and that is the textured bubbles. I love this for backgrounds because it can be stamped in such a variety of color combinations, and it really works beautifully for just about any card theme that you can think of. Now, you can also use the entire design, or you can stamp just a portion of it. And for my card, I've stamped the entire background, and I've used 2 different ink colors with a little misting of water, and that's helped me create kind of a watercolor effect here. Now, I really find that it helps to have a misty for this technique, so that's what I've got ready on my work surface here. A couple of other things that I need to have on hand. I've got my stamp on one side, my smooth white cardstock on the other. I'm going to be working with 2 of the dye inks from Hunky Dory. I've got the olive green, and I also have Blue Lagoon. Now, I'm going to add a misting of water, so a water mister, of course, is something that I will also need. So I've got all my supplies on hand. I'm going to start out with the lighter of my 2 colors, which is the olive green, and just ink up my stamp. So come along here, make sure that this is all inked up. And then I'm going to come back in with my second color, so the Blue Lagoon. And in this case, I'm just kind of going around the edges. You can have it go a bit in the center if you want to. And then I'll add a little misting of water. Now, when I do this, I'm not going to go too close. I don't want to flood it. So I'm going to hold my mister a couple of inches away and give a couple of spritzes. Then simply close this up and make sure that I'm able to make contact with the stamp in all these areas. And open this up, and I have my stamped kind of watercolor effect background. Now, what I really like with this is that you're able to get a completely different look every single time you do this, even if you're using the same ink color. So it will depend how much water you're using. That will, of course, create a blurrier effect if you use more water. You can also lighten the colors of your ink if you use quite a lot of water as well. So I've got one here where I had the exact same process, a little bit of different patterning on here, but you can go light, you can go dark. This is one that I've done using the Fire Coral and Red Chili ink pads. So that's going to give you a very different effect as well. So lots of really cool things that you can do with this very simple technique. Okay, so I'm going to move aside my misty and just set that to one side and then bring back in my card, and we can take another look at this. Now you can see I've simply mounted the piece onto black and then white cardstock. I have some of the black and white Dotted Duos paper as the background, and the focal is the Hope Your Day is Wonderful die from Creative Expressions. I've mounted this onto an oval scalloped cutting die from hot off the press. Now, I have a new trick for adhering sentiment dies that are very detailed. And I know this is a question a lot of people have. So I got a package with some sticky specks in it and thought I'd give it a try. It really works beautifully for this. And I have to say, things are going to be a lot easier for me now. So this is a micro adhesive, as it says. And all you need to do is just pull back the liner, you can take your die cut element and then you just simply press it on here. You can press the liner down again and pull it off, and you've got these micro dots on the back. And that just makes it so much easier to adhere your delicate, intricate dies onto your background. So sticky specks are my choice for things like this. Really did make a big difference. Okay, I've got some flourish dazzles on here, a little gingham bow. On the inside of the card, a simple strip of that dotted background paper and more dazzles again on the oval and scallop die to complete the sentiment. Okay, now that we've seen this technique, let's take a look at it with another stamp design. For this card project, I've used that same ink misting technique, but I was a little more deliberate in where I position the color. So you can see here I've got more of the green on my flower stems and the yellows and oranges on the flowers themselves. So let's take a look at this process. First, I have my autumn flower stamp, and I've got it on one side of my Misty, and then some white cardstock on the other side. I'm going to be working with 3 different ink colors this time. So I've got the canary yellow, fire coral, and then rainforest, and that's going to go around the leaves. Of course, I've also got my water mister on hand and ready to go. Okay, so let's start again with our lightest color, and that's the canary yellow. And I'll just ink up the entire stamp with this. Okay, so make sure that all of the areas are covered here. And you always want to start with your lightest color because you don't want to risk contaminating your ink pads with darker colors as you go. Okay, then I can bring in my fire coral. And this time I'm going to concentrate the color just on the flowers themselves. Now, if I miss anything, because I've got that yellow underneath, should be okay. So I'm going to kind of come in here at a bit of an angle and try and get as much of those flowers as I can. Okay, and then the last part is coming in with the rainforest green. And here I'm going to concentrate on the stems and leaves. Now, I'm not worried too much about it being completely perfect because it is a handmade card, so it will be fine regardless. Then I'm going to come in with my water mister and just give a couple of mists and then close up my Misty. Once again, just make sure that I've got contact with all of those areas. Press gently but firmly and then lift. Now it looks like I've got some space down here that I missed. So what I can do, come back, add a little bit more of that green, another quick misting, and then let's make sure that that's really working. This is the beauty of the Misty. There we go. Now I've got it. So as you can see, I've got a nice blended effect. My flowers are yellow and orange. My leaves and stems are green. Now the fun part about this too is that you can still get some really different effects. So this is the exact same process, exact same colors, a little bit lighter pressure, I would say, and I've got a very different effect. Now also, of course, you can skip the green and go for just the yellow and orange together, and you have a really nice monochromatic look, or you can work in some darker colors as well, and then you have a nice kind of a brownish orange tinge in there, really beautiful for autumn flowers. Okay, so I'm going to move aside my Misty and then bring back in my original card, and let's take another look at this. So you can see here that I'm using a larger card base. This is actually a 6-inch square card base. Again, I've used the Dotted Duos paper and I've mixed the large and the small patterns together. Always work in a solid cardstock in between those two patterns, and that will help to set them apart. I have some gold dazzles for my sentiment and also my border, and a little bit of yellow silk ribbon. Now to soften the edges of both my card and my stamped piece, I gently blended a little bit of butterscotch ink on there, and that just creates a nice soft edge. Now for the card inside, I have the Wishing You Well die from Creative Expressions, again on one of the oval and scallop die combinations. Okay, so these are 2 easy ways to color your stamps with those die inks. Let's take a look at a third way by using dye inks as watercolor paints. This sweet toadstool stamp is perfect for coloring in, so you can use your markers, your colored pencils, whatever you like to color with. Now you can also use your dye ink pads, which is what I did with this card. Now you have two options for this technique. You can stamp the design with a permanent ink pad, maybe like a StazOn for example. You can also stamp and heat emboss, which is what I did here. And I love the raised edges and how it gives you a really kind of tactile effect. So for this, I first stamped with my Wow embossing ink pad and then embossed using the clear bark from Stampendous. And this is going to give me a nice dark brown image, and it really is perfect for autumn. Then I'm going to take my ink colors and use them to paint in my image. So what I'll do is move aside my stamp and my finished card and leave us with this stamped and embossed toadstool design. So you can see I've got some shine on here. If you could touch it, you would feel that it is raised. Now those raised edges are going to make it a lot easier for me to paint in my image. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Working onto a craft mat, I'm going to use a water brush. Now you can use a paintbrush for this technique. I tend to use water brushes because they're really easy to clean and because they have a nice fine tip, which is going to make it easier for me to go around some of these detail areas. Now the other thing I have is my water mister, and that's just going to help me add a little bit of water to my ink. Okay, the three inks that I'm working with, roasted coffee, I've got the red chili and rainforest green. So I'm going to start by simply putting some ink onto my craft mat. So I'm just pressing the ink pad right onto that craft mat, and I'm going to use it as my palette. Now what I'll do is mist a bit of water, not into my ink because that can tend to result in the ink kicking back up a little bit, but I've just spritzed some right next to my ink. You can barely see it, but you'll see it when I start coloring in. Okay, I'll pick up a little bit of water on my water brush, and I'm going to start with my lightest color here, which is the rainforest green. And when I do this, all I need to do is just let the brush be guided by those raised embossed edges. This is really nice, especially if you are not used to doing painting or you haven't done it for a while, or maybe you just are a little bit hesitant with some of the more detail areas. This really does help to create a little bit more confidence when you're painting things in. Okay, so those raised edges will help to hold in my medium, especially if I have a little bit too much water on my brush. Sometimes that can happen too. Always helps to have a tissue or a little bit of paper towel on hand as well. And then you can blot some of that if you have any excess water. Okay, so I'm just coming in and painting, adding water as I go. And I'm just working onto a smooth white cardstock. You can do this onto watercolor cardstock if you want to. I find that very often watercolor cardstock has a texture to it, and sometimes that doesn't translate well with really detailed stamp design. So give it a try if you have some smooth watercolor cardstock that may do the trick, but a good sturdy weight white cardstock will also work. Okay, so I think I've got quite a lot of my grass and my leaves on here. Now when this dries, what I can do, if I want to come back and add some more shading around some of the detail areas of my leaves, I can definitely do that too. It's not required, but if you want to, you can definitely do that as well. Okay, now I'm going to just clean off my brush, pick up a little bit more water, and now let's do one of our toadstools. I'm going to do this one here that's the closest to me. And what I like to do is just get down a little bit of color, and then I'm going to take advantage of the fine tip on this water brush to go around some of those little dots on here because I want to leave those white. So I'm just working around them carefully. Not going to use too much water as I do that because that will increase the tendency for it to flood. So blot off the brush if you need to and come back with a little bit less water. Okay, and then I can be a little bit more free in some of these areas here. And again, just let the edges of your embossing guide your brush through here. Okay, I've got a little bit of a shadowy area here, so I can come back with a little bit more of that red ink and just work with the design. That has been so beautifully designed. I really like this one. Okay, so then I've got my mushroom, and I would just need to go back around and do the other ones as well. I've got two little ones down here too. But let's come back with some of that roasted coffee, which sounds really good right about now. And again, pick up some of that color, and all you need to do is just let that brush be guided on those stems. Okay, very, very simple to do. Okay, so I've got two of the stems. You can see here with that red and then also the leaves on there. Now what I'm going to do is just kind of mop up my palette here. Really easy to clean up on my craft sheet. And we'll bring back in the original card and let's take another look at this. So you can see I've added some more of the red around on some of these little flowers or berries here and the edges. And of course also my other two little mushrooms down at the bottom. Now, I've got the piece mounted simply onto white cardstock, and what I did is I mounted this piece up onto some foam tape. Then I put it onto another piece of white cardstock. And my card front is covered with a green pattern paper. I inked the edges with rainforest so I can get a softer look. I also added some dragonfly dazzles from the Zen Leaves collection, and I used more of them on the card inside. So not only the dragonflies, but also these beautiful leaves. The sentiment is also from that same sticker pack, as is the border here. And you'll notice that I've got some of the leaves mounted up onto green dot paper, just trimmed around those edges so that I have some continuity from the front of the card as well into the inside. The Hooray for the Day dazzles are on an oval die, as we've seen before, and I've got a little bit of craft cardstock in here too. So this is how you can use your dye inks in combination with your stamps to create a watercolor painted effect. I've been showing you a lot of cards using the oval scallop dies for sentiments. Well, there's also a circle scallop die set, and one that I love to use, especially with larger stamp images like this, because you can spotlight any portion of the stamp and it gives you a completely different look. So here's a card that I made using the Hare in the Brambles stamp, and I wanted to spotlight this sweet little face. So what I did is simply stamped the design, and I used the slate gray prism ink for this. And then what I can do is take any one of the circles from that die set and just kind of play with the positioning, see how big I want my circle to be or which portion of the design I want to capture. It really does give you a very different look. And in fact, if you then go back to those indispensable oval dies, here's one that I've die cut from that same stamp set. And as you can see, you can get some really, really different looks. So I can just take this and pop it onto a card where I've already got some of that dotted paper on there. And I have the start to a really nice card design. In fact, what I could do is take the very same layout that I've got here and use it over here. And I've got something new and fresh and different that utilizes the very same layout and technique. So now back to our card. What I've done is simply mounted this onto several of the nested circles, and this provides a frame to contrast the dotted background. I've added a Hugs Dazzle down here, and I've got some jute twine wrapped around the card front. Now for the card inside, I have this Hope Your Day is Wonderful die, which you may remember from the first card we looked at. Again, this is on an oval die cut. So with this last card, I think we can see just how much fun we can have with these beautiful designs from Creative Expressions, especially when we add in some die inks from Hunky Dory and classic dotted paper. Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you for being a part of the Paper Wishes family. We're really glad that you're here with us, and I can't wait to see what you create. Do be sure to leave a comment. We love to hear what you think. Each item can be purchased separately, and you can see them below. However, we've also bundled them into a creative money saver just for you. For the money saver, just see this webisode on paperwishes.com.